Okay. Good morning, everyone. This is Siona Salvi from Kaash Foundation. We at the foundation are extremely delighted to have you all tune in live for our faculty development program in history on the theme of historians, compass, and tools. The program is going to be a 6-day web series. That is from starting from today till 30th May 2020. And it's being organized by Kaash Foundation Center of Academic and Professional Development in collaboration with the Directorate Archaeology and Museums Government of Maharashtra. The very ink with which history is written is merely fluid prejudice, a great quote by Mark Twain. With this opening quote, I warmly welcome once again to this board. To the first day of our faculty development program, I would take this opportunity to invite Dr. Avkaz Zadav, the founder trustee of Kaash Foundation and the director of CAPT. We welcome you, Avkaz sir. The floor is yours now.
Good morning, one and all. Thank you, Siona, for that introduction. We are here to inaugurate our first faculty development program, which would be a 6-session series. We in all have 12 speakers lined up, and we are trying to blend the history in totality rather. As Abraham Lincoln has rightly said, fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. And to quote Oscar Wilde, anybody can make history. Perhaps taking the clue from there, we thought of having our entire faculty development program on the line of historians, compass, and tools. In various times, history as a subject has been variedly handled, from the meridian hour to the wee hours of the morning, from a patronizing circumstance to the mortifying status. This distinguished subject has seen it all. Correspondingly, a diverse range of research and writings have inconsistently painted this subject with venerations or disapproval. On the one hand, we also emphasize that history should be nothing else but a dialogue between past and present. But perhaps history writing is something which should be also a dialogue between present and future. Because ultimately the documents which we access today also becomes documents in the form of history in the written form in the due course. Undoubtedly, it then increases the accountability of the research scholars to carefully and craftily pen the pages of history. The range of resources which we actually access, can we really call it resources? Can we really call it sources? No document, no history is widely placed on record, but do we really look at documents as our sources or we convert them into our source? Through the medium of our FDP, we wish to connect the dots further and trace all the entire pattern of historical writing or historiography as such. The methodology, in fact, has a lot of variation. We have multiple schools of thoughts, we have different ideologies, we have different styles of writing history. But the objective of all this is to come out closer to truth, or maybe the actual truth for that matter. This FDP would emphasize on the application of auxiliary and interdisciplinary schools in writing history, that matter. As Mahatma Gandhi had once said, a small body of determined spirits, fired by an unquenchable faith in their mission, can alter the course of history. Similarly, the scholars from the fields of anthropology, archival science, archaeology, oral history, and history of the world and urban history would draw out unconventional parameters for the study. This specialized FTP course on the historian's toolbox would lay emphasis on learning the nuances of the above stated process. The proposed lecture series is nothing else but a culmination and combination of some scholarly work which are practiced, tried, and applied for that matter. We'll be covering the areas in the form of methodology of historical research, current trends in ethnography and anthropological research, blueprints of historicity and credibility, the pragmatic procedure of writing, methods of primary research, archival science and digital repository, scope and challenges in oral history, role of museums as repositories of history and heritage. We propose to have the series for almost 18 hours, and viewers and participants, all those registered participants, are requested to attend all the series, all the 6 day series. You would be requested to send your feedback, and based on your feedback, the e certificate would be generated. To give insight about what exactly is Kaash Foundation all about. Kaash Foundation is an NGO which came up in October 2019. It works on four verticals: E2, H2, education, environment, health, and heritage. It was under the category of education we thought of branching out CAPD, Center of Academic and Professional Development. It was primarily to enhance and empower the process of research and pedagogy. The objectives of CAPD, that is Center of Professional and Academic Development, is to provide opportunities for academic excellence to faculty and educational institutions through quality improvement systems, optimal delivery models, and creating avenues of possibility of collaborative research. Second objective, to provide best practices to enhance teaching skills and professional development by conducting workshops, seminars, conferences, and faculty development programs. Third objective, to provide suggestions, recommendations, resources, and training programs to institutions, organizations seeking to strengthen, upgrade, and increase their footfalls in the academic and international circles. And finally, to create opportunities for students by helping them to identify potentials and develop core skills, interact by participation, and learn through foreign exchange programs. So, CAPD basically is a venture where some of us who are in academics or other activists who've come together to identify certain core values of our higher education, or perhaps the values which are diminishing. And it will be an attempt where we would engage in exchange, collaboration, research, and also conducting various programs in the forms of symposiums, conferences, and workshops. In the category of publications, CAPD under Kaash Foundation will soon launch to international journals as well. So all the viewers, participants, if at all in any manner you would like to get associated with CAPD, Center of Academic and Professional Development, you are welcome. If you want to have institutional partnership, you are also welcome for that as well. Let's come together to build up a society. Let's come together to have a very holistic environment of learning. Coming back to our theme, I would like to quote Voltaire, who said, "Indeed, history is nothing more than a tableau of crimes and misfortunes for that matter." And go on record for Napoleon, he said, "History is a set of lies agreed upon." So for this 12 series, we'll try to uncover the truth, uncover the lie, or try to reach out the way I said, closer to truth, if not the objective truth for that matter. I would like to quote Will Durant and conclude my introductory remark. History is mostly guessing, the rest is prejudice. So I think we would open with this remark and say, perhaps we don't want to really guess, we want to be closer to accuracy. And when we are closer to accuracy, I think somewhere we'll be doing our job responsibility. Because writing history is rather more act of responsibility rather than mere publication. And today, the kind of society we are in, the kind of atmosphere we are in, I think this act of responsibility also comes with the act of accountability. So what we write today becomes document and source of history for tomorrow. So we owe a lot to the generations in the due course. With this, I conclude my opening remarks. I wish all the speakers, the panelists, that they would definitely come up with all the enriching ideas. They would be able to comfortably share with their insights as such. Viewers, we are trying to optimize our technical backup as much as possible. But in case for any kind of eventuality, kindly cooperate with us because ultimately we are also at the mercy of technology and we will not be able to do much. Even the speakers are also trying very hard to catch up with this entire process of new learning process or other new normal, what we call today. So in case of any kind of eventuality, we will be in touch with you on a personal note, all right, and we'll try to cover up in case of any glitches which occur. Again, ultimately, it is not in our hand to sort out all the technical glitches online. As you know, we are going on YouTube live, it's a live streaming. So it's an earnest appeal in case if something goes wrong technologically. Kindly bear with us, kindly cooperate with us. With this, I end my opening remarks and I once again welcome all of you for this 6-day series of faculty development program in history. Thank you for your participation and thank you for encouragement. Over to Siona. I think Siona, you have to switch on your mic. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Avkazada, for an insightful explanation on the concept of the theme, which has for the entire faculty development program. Commencing with our session for today, we are honored to have two great personalities in the field of research with us on board today. Vrinda Patare and Michelle Bovin. I would request the panelist Vrinda Patare to be on the board. She is the head of the Godrej Archives, a business archive of Godrej Group. Today, her presentation will be on knowledge of retrieval to knowledge of creation. Ms. Vrinda Patare, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Fiona. And thank you, Dr. Avkash Jadhav and Dr. Chaya Goswami for inviting me to speak at this faculty development program on historians compound. Kaash Foundation and also the Directorate of Archaeology and Museums, Government of Maharashtra, for organizing this wonderful program. So when I was told that I'll be the first speaker for this series, I was, it did stress me out. But as the archives might be the first place where the historians land when they start working on the modern period, I think starting the series with the archives was in a way a serendipitous too. The scientification of history that take place around 19th century emphasized on the idea that the true writing of history had to be based on the critical appraisal of authentic, and that often means textual source material from the past. The opening sentence of the French work, The Introduction to the Study of History, published in 1898 by Charles Victor, echoed this idea that became the anchor point of the scientific historiography. The basis of their method was the belief that all history comes from facts retrieved from the first-hand documents. Now, these facts are then viewed by the historian from many different perspectives, allowing for an unbiased approach at history. This emphasis on documents of true writing of history necessitated the methodical and systematic collection of these documents at a single place, and which is the archive. Thus, the birth of scientific historiography was also accompanied by the emergence of archive in a modern sense. This is the traditional role that has been envisaged for the archives, and many historians look at this space as a form of records retrieval. Now, while talking about this traditional role that has been envisaged by the historians, I'll be also talking about how the role is becoming more dynamic and how archives are now looked upon as the sites of not just the retrieval of information, but also of knowledge creation. And I'll be using Godrej Archives as a case study. So first, let me talk about the idea of memory and the idea of archives. Now, I happen to come across this one stanza in Bhagavad Gita, which talks about, and I quote, that from loss of memory, the destruction of intelligence, and from the destruction of intelligence, he perishes. Now, this is how in Indian philosophical discourses, memory has always been associated with self-intimation and personal identity. Debates over the relationship between memory and identity have taken place in philosophical space. As identity often being linked with memories, individuals devise different methods of treasuring their fond memories by preserving objects that carry those memories across time and space. Now, they can be photographs, they can be letters, they can be diaries, they can be scrapbooks. And in today's age of information technology, even emails, blogs, and social networking websites, including Facebook, can also be the spaces where the memories are being treasured. And such memories connects us with one another, and our little stories then become a part of the larger narrative. A shared history is a large part of what binds individuals into a community and imbues a group with distinct identity. Here, memory becomes critical in validating not only the individual but the cultural identity of any society. Now, how does society choose to remember? How does one reconstruct memory of a society? Now, the quest for these answers to these questions can help us understand the very basis of the institutions like archives. And it is often the fear of losing memory and thereby the identity that might have stimulated a need for institutions such as archives, whereby the society can preserve its collection of its past in all shapes and sizes. Thus, archives then become the spaces of evolution of collective memory or the exteriorization of memory, as Stoller, anthropologist, had put it. That is the ways in which memory is maintained outside the human faculty of memory, from oral to written to printed to visual and nowadays to electronic memory. Or as Vikram Seth, an Indian novelist and poet, would have described, we continue accumulating material for future nostalgia at the spaces such as archives. Now, in India, the tradition of archiving memory goes a long way. In many travelogues of ancient as well as medieval period, we find references to record offices of various kings. Yuan Sang, a Chinese pilgrim who was in India from 630 to 644, mentions record office known as Nilopita, where good or bad are recorded and instances of calamity and good fortune are set forth in detail. I unquote. Arthashastra mentions about Akshapatar, which was office of accounts, and considers creation of records as one of the duties of the king. Shukraniti even states that no business of the state was done without a written document. Abdul Razak, who visited Vijayanagar Empire in 1442, mentions that in front of the Diwan Khana or minister's office, there was a raised gallery where the records were kept. The Akbarnama, who gives a description as to how Emperor Akbar had established a records office called Daftar Khana in 1574, which was situated close to Emperor's palace at Fatehpur Sikri. This tradition of maintaining records is also evident during the Maratha period, and later Peshwa Daftar, holding the administrative papers of Peshwas, is still in existence, and many are referring to that. Interestingly, Shah Shuja, in his memoirs Waqat-e-Shah Shuja, published of writing memoirs, recorded that many of the great kings write their memoirs or get them written by historians so that these compositions would remain as a memorial on the pages of passing time. Thus, if you see that it is this urge of capturing fleeting memories that gave rise to the idea of records keeping and preserving them in the records offices. Thus, India doesn't seem to be devoid of such idea of record keeping. However, the idea of archives in the modern sense as we know only germinated in the colonial period. And in 1891, on the recommendation of the civil auditor to transfer all the records of the government to a grand central arsenal, the Imperial Department was established in Calcutta. After the transfer of the capital to Delhi, even this department was shifted to Delhi in the year 1911. And after independence, this department came to be known as what we know today, the National Archives of India. Now, these archives that I mentioned just now are mostly, and as I quote, sites that serve to constitute forms of authoritative forms of memory. So archives till recently have been always about power, maintaining the power, about the power to present, power of the present to control what is and will be known as about the past. about the power of remembering over forgetting. And by having this power to decide what goes in the archive, archivist exerts a formidable power to select what the future will remember. And thus, archives, in a way, is a tool for the government to control what we remember. But what happens to the archives post independence? So, in spite of this power that archives can have in controlling the past, somehow Indians suffered from amnesia post independence. And as Ramchandra Guha notes in his preface to India After Gandhi, for us Indians, history ends at 15th August 1947. And somewhere he actually blames it on historians who, by training and temperament, have restricted themselves to the period before independence. But I believe that it's not so much the historians, but the non availability of records of contemporary India is also responsible for this lack of interest towards contemporary history. And anyone who is writing on any aspects of contemporary India post independence, especially if they're writing about 60s and 70s, will tell you that how difficult it is to get the records of this particular period. And in spite of the passage of the Public Records Act of 1993, a tradition of preserving records for future and selecting and transferring them over to the National Archives of India or the state archives has not been rigorously pursued as one wishes it to be. Now, let me share a few of my experiences when I started my journey as a researcher before becoming an archivist. So, in the year 2003, while working as a research associate on the ONGC Museum project, I set out on a search for records investigating independent India's oil policy and the thought process that led to the creation of ONGC in 1956. I naturally wanted to know how and who gave them the name, what triggered the independent India's oil policy, or why they chose Dehradun as their headquarters. So we started asking for these supporting records, but ONGC had no answers, and they actually couldn't help us with any records. And they also had not transferred their records to the National Archives of India. So Ministry's record room was the only option that was available to us. But when we went there and when we went through the register that they had at this records room, we were completely disillusioned when we saw the word destroyed in a column against the file that was titled Creation of ONGC in 1956. Now that was a complete disaster, but then somehow we came to know that there are personal papers of Keshav Dev Malviya, who was then the minister at the Ministry of Natural Resources and Oil Policy. Now, some of these letters are displayed at the ONGC Museum at Dehradun, but they had not been, but if these were not deposited in a Nehru Memorial Library, it would have been difficult for us to know such an interesting aspect of history of oil business in India. And I was recently told that now ONGC has transferred some of their records to the National Archives, which I think would be a great resource for the historians. So even though we witnessed this kind of general apathy towards preserving the public records post-independence, there are also not been attempts or no parallel archives movements have also been witnessed to set up the institutional archives, because the idea of archives till recently was restricted only to preserving the government records. The origins of government archives lie in the information needs and the socio-political values of the governments who establish and maintain them. Now, nature of such an archive can restrict us from questioning the power of such archives in controlling information. And historians often look at an archive as a neutral repository of facts. However, we cannot overlook the fact that though through the archives, the past is controlled and certain stories will be privileged and others marginalized. So often, actually, when you visit the archives, you might have seen the box with the catalogs, with the files. So sometimes actually, and the box is a very familiar sight that would be handed over to any historian. But then when I started actually looking at this box, it actually really symbolizes how the archives is perceived. So what does this box really signify? What does this cubic shaped little world symbolize? And it is not an open world. And it says that it's an enclosure. It defines the boundaries. It defines the interior and the exterior space. And it gives comfort to the contents, protects it from any confrontation with the exterior world. And while doing it, it embodies complete control over what's inside. And that's basically what this box actually talks about, how the archives are basically treated. And therefore, this really evokes the Orwellian dystopia. The idea of archives as a tool to control the past and represents enormous power over memory and identity, over the fundamental ways in which society seeks evidence of its past. Now, Stoller, the anthropologist from Michigan, she in her article Colonial Archives and the Arts of Governor discusses as to how in recent years the word archive has been debated, and the discussion has taken the archives well beyond its popular connotation of dusty basements and old parchments in cultural studies or in the World Wide Web and elsewhere. And I quote, drawing upon Foucault and suggesting that information like power does not exist in vacuum, Thomas researched in the Imperial Archive discusses the archive as a utopian space of comprehensive knowledge, not a building, nor even a collection of texts, but the collectively imagined junction of all that was known or knowable, and seeks to demonstrate how the Imperial Archive was a fantasy of knowledge collected and united in the service of state and empire. So, control of the archives, variously defined, means control of society, thus, control of determining history's winners and losers. In the world of information technology, archive is used as a noun to describe a machine readable location. Archives is also used as a transitive verb for the action of transferring computer data to a place for frequently used files, for example, to archive data from hard drive in the actual computer to backup tapes or CD-ROM. While cultural theorists and information technologies both embrace the notion of an archive as a store of information, the former, that is cultural theorists, conceives of the archive as a source of knowledge and power, essential for social and personal identity. Whereas the information technologies views the archive as a neutral, even mechanical accumulation of information for safekeeping. And I unquote. So, however, the traditional meaning of the archives is now being challenged and contested, and as scholars, historians, anthropologists, sociologists, and others increasingly discover and focus upon context. And therefore, it is really essential to reconsider the relationship between archives and the societies or the institutions that create and use them. So, how can one really challenge the status quo of the idea of the archives that was restricted only to the public records alone? How can the monopoly of public archives in holding the truth be broken? How to democratize the information? So, now historians as well as archivists are challenging these ideas and trying to find out truth and evidence beyond the walls of the government archives in records held by institutions, businesses, or even individuals and public memories too. Making the truth more plural by making available different perspectives on otherwise monopolized truth. Unfortunately, our practice of archiving such records and such public memories is not as common in India as one wishes to be. And institutionalization of information is quite a rare phenomena as well. But we really cannot afford ignoring the records lying at many institutions and businesses that have completed more than 50 or 100 years of their existence. Now, their stories are interlocked with the national and socio-economic narrative, as no one can deny the impact the business or the institution has on lives of its own employees, on its stakeholders, their habits, values, philosophies, viewpoints. At the same time, society has an enduring influence on the character of business or institution and in reshaping the socio-cultural as well as economic landscape. Inherent socio-cultural values shape the core of businesses as well as these institutional practices. But being from the Business Archive, now let me take you through the journey of business archives in India and what kind of information that they can offer. So first, let's look at the development of business archives in India. So it was only with the emergence of business history as a separate discipline in 1960s that the critical writing of corporate past made its beginning. Dr. Dwijendra Tripathi, who joined as an assistant professor of business history at Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, played a pioneering role. The inclusion of business history in the postgraduate course at IIM Ahmedabad, in a way, provided the necessary impetus to the growth of the discipline, as the need was felt to study the character of Indian business historically, and historians started exploring the business related topic. Around this time, the literature that was available on the subject was also not substantial. Focus of the existing literature on the subject of business history was mostly studies relating to the pre-British economic and financial systems, few industry studies with only peripheral references to business. However, amidst the literature of this genre, remarked Dr. Tripathi, monograph prepared under the leadership of D.R. Gadgil of Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, titled Origins of the Modern Indian Business Class and Notes on the Rise of the Business, could be certainly qualified as the first attempt to review the stages of the growth of Indian business and the composition of business class. The other literature mostly consists of biographies, memoirs of prominent businessmen, and souvenirs, volumes of companies or firms. However, these works suffer from narcissism and lack objectivity as they were written in most cases by either businessmen themselves or authors commissioned by the company or a firm. Thus, in absence of records and because of the paucity of the literature on business, business history was not adequately written, and realizing this, Dr. Tripathi started encouraging businessmen and business houses to preserve their records. In 1966, in the 37th session of the Indian Historical Records Commission, the first ever discussion was held on the sources and problems of business history in India. And Dr. Tripathi's persistent efforts in this area led to a passage of a resolution in 50th session of Indian Historical Records Commission that was held in 2003. Now, this resolution 6 stated that all necessary steps should be taken to identify and list business houses that may be willing to make their records available for research and or that require help in the matter of cataloging and preserving their holdings so that these holdings are easily accessible by research. Now, this was really the beginning of business archiving in India. And by this time, that is by 2003, already the Tata Group of companies had established the Tata Central Archives at Pune and Tata Iron and Steel Archives at Jamshedpur, whereas in Godrej, the idea of setting up the archives had germinated. Among the banking sector, the archives of the Reserve Bank of India, established in the year 1981 in Pune, is actually the oldest bank archives in India. The State Bank of India Archives and Museums located in Calcutta was started in 2007. National Archives of India, realizing the relevance of business record for reconstructing the economic past of India, organized a seminar in the year 2008 to discuss the precepts and prospects for business archives in India. Now, over the last decade, there has been a growing interest in preservation of business records, as could be witnessed by the presence of 50 companies, including banks, at the International Conference on Business Archives organized by Reserve Bank of India, jointly with the International Council of Archives and National Archives of India. In 2017, Godrej Archives also hosted the similar conference, and as a result of all these efforts on varied fronts, over the last 2 decades, we observe a steady growth in the general awareness for preservation and the use of business records, and more companies are contemplating to set up the archives. Cipla, a global pharmaceutical company, set up their archives at Mumbai Central in 2014. Companies such as DCM Shriram, Dr. Reddy's, Wipro, and Bajaj are also having their archives now. And few companies such as Birla, Jasubai Group, Mahindra and Mahindra have also started in this direction. But considering that there are 58 top Indian companies that have been listed in Forbes General 2000 ranking for 2017, and even among those which are not listed on this list, many have completed more than 50 years of their existence, and there are not many archives compared to this kind of stats. So India still has miles to go. It is still a challenge to establish the value of business archives in India. As a result, business records are, though the most valuable resource for business history, are yet the most underutilized sources of business history. And such records are really very important if one needs to pen down the contemporary history of India, its people, its business, its choices, its thinking, etc. Undoubtedly, such archives will not only assist a business to sort, select, and store historically important records, but they can also play an important role in communicating to the outside world the role of these businesses in shaping the country, its economy, its society, and its people as well. So, drawing upon the experiences at Godrej Archives, let me give you a glimpse of how a company archives and its records serve as tools and sources for an empathic understanding of the past, and how it doesn't remain just the story of a particular company, but it's also a part of larger national narrative. So in the year 2006, Godrej Archives established as a separate unit to keep history alive as a reference, so that in any work the company does in present or future, it always stick to the roots in anything they offer or practice. Now, the objectives were laid down back in 1995 when the idea was germinated by the late Saurabh Godrej, the then chairman of Godrej Group, who envisioned archives to be a heritage center offering invaluable material for reference and research. Now, Saurabh Godrej's intent to offer the archival material for research and reference was a clear direction for the archives. Now, this was a very significant step, as company records are often kept closely guarded, and even if they are preserved, they are out of reach of researchers. So this was actually quite good that we could open it up for researchers. Now, this helped us in communicating stories of not just the product and the processes, but also of people that make the Indian corporate world. And that consists of not just the entrepreneurs, but the managers, engineers, professionals, workers, distributors, customers, and so on, who were at once the actors and the audience in the corporate play of events. Now, corporations do not function in isolation. They too operate in social spaces, and no one can deny the influence that the business has on lives of its own employees and stakeholders, and on its consumers, and especially the patterns of the consumption. At the same time, society and external events also has an enduring impact on the character of business and the way the business may choose to operate. Now, this constant interaction between the society and a corporate entity can help get a better understanding of corporate landscape of any nation. And hence, corporate history is not to be viewed as just a single story of a single business group, but it is a collection of stories bringing forth the multiple perspectives of corporate life. To give you a few examples, we have in our collection one newspaper clipping, the only interview that the founder has ever given, Adeshar Godrej, in 1927 to Indian Herald, which was the newspaper then. Now it's a defunct newspaper. And where he actually talks about how Swadeshi has inspired him to start the manufacturing of locks in 1897. And he also criticizes youngsters for not coming forward and entering the manufacturing world to make India economically self-reliant, which is often this kind of a narrative we often hear even today. And that's quite an interesting thing to see these kind of discussions at that point of time. Then we also have received few of the personal diaries of the engineers who used to maintain the technical data. And one of such diaries, which is really very precious for us, is of one of the plant manager of the typewriter plant, because the Godrej was the first company to manufacture the all Indian typewriter. So now that diary becomes really important to understand how this plant manager went to Germany to study the typewriter manufacturing. And he has actually written all the technical details of even the Devanagari typescript, how it has to be done. So these are also the technological history that makes a very interesting kind of research. Then we also have a lot of photographs collection by the prominent industrial photographer like Mittar Bedi of 1970s. Now, the kind of work that he has done is actually the study in industrial photography itself. So they are not merely the photographs of a Godrej factory, but you can actually understand how the industrial photography was developing at that point of time and what kind of contributions these photographers have made to the subject. So it doesn't really remain as a story of Godrej, but also a story of photography. Then there are a lot of advertisements in our collection, which actually talks about the whole emergence of advertising agencies, what kind of strategies they really employ to lure the consumers, what kind of consumer patterns they influenced by just employing a few of the celebrities to endorse the products, why particular celebrities were really chosen, And this is quite an interesting kind of a study, because advertisements also talk about the society and how actually the consumer patterns were in a particular society. Then you also have a lot of sales and marketing data and sales and marketing literature, marketing surveys. And marketing surveys are actually nothing but actually they are talking about the society and how they are consuming things and how they are buying things. So maybe in Delhi, certain products would be in demand, but maybe in Chennai, certain products would be demand. Why is that so? So it is also an understanding of the society, how actually their taste and choices are formed because of the social influences. So these are actually the different studies that actually the business archives can inspire. Then we also have a lot of literature on our dealers and how the dealers actually went into a dealership. So this is also a history of small entrepreneurship and these offsprings that every business has. So this is not just the one particular story, but also the stories of many small entrepreneurs which actually support the kind of corporate Godrej is. And then there are a lot of important events that are happening in the country, which actually has an impact on uh, the company. And for example, when the partition happened, actually the Godrej was always located in Mumbai, but then there were also the impacts that has to be borne. And then we found few documents which actually talk about, there is one circular particularly which talks about that now the products have to be labeled as made in India when you're sending it to Karachi. Now, Karachi till 1947, Godrej had a dealer over there and they could easily just transport it. But now suddenly it's a foreign country, export license have to be sought for. So there are documents related to that. And then there is this one circular with just one line saying that now Made in India label has to be posted on it. Now that really says a lot about how the partition is. And that is actually 2 years after 1947. So the idea of partition also took time to sink in. And then there are also circulars which talk about because there was a mechanic who used to work with the Karachi dealer and now he has decided to move to India. So the All India sales manager writing to all the dealers and the branches saying that if there are any job opportunities for this mechanic who is coming to India. So these are actually the impacts that have on the normal lives of Indian citizens. And it is really amazing to see that kind of a literature coming out of the business archives. So that's why, even though, I mean, these are some of just some examples to talk about. So it is actually a rich resource to talk about the society, to talk about the consumption. But can the business archives be also objective? If writing, if the business archivist is writing history about the organization she works for, can she be objective in writing it? Can she choose between the role that she may have to play in entrepreneurial marketing or brand building, and that of, and also that of conforming to the academic standards based on more scientific research? So especially in case of business archives, where an archivist being an internal agent is expected to be a brand conscious, and archives is often looked upon as a brand building activity, there begins an ethical dilemma for any archivist's mind, torn between two roles, that of a custodian of records and that of a historian who interprets these records. A dilemma between abiding by what the organization demands and what the inner historian urges you to interpret. Now, objectivity itself is a questionable notion, but to bring about as authentic story as possible and making it more democratic archive, what the archivists need to do is to acknowledge the multiple subjectivities and be more conscious in creating the multiple narratives of the story by making available varied sources and sometimes even contradictory sources. So what archivists then requires is being contextually accurate. Thus, the archives needs to work towards opening of the exterior walls of the box that I spoke about earlier and make it more inclusive. Now, what really we have to do with this box then? So basically what we realize that we need to really start opening this box layer by layer and start letting the audience and the viewers or the users of the archives also to participate in whole unraveling of what is inside this box. And I thought that it will be really a great transformation of an archive from a closed space to an accessible and inclusive space in modern times. So history is basically not offering any solution, but the perspectives. And in such scenario, accessibility to varied sources is going to be a key to bridge the gap between the projected histories and the multiple histories being revealed through documents, photographs, objects, and oral memoirs, etc. Now, all these are now essentially part of the archives, which is breaking away from the earlier notion of archiving that was only limited to the written records. And now even the digital records have become part of it, and archives is transforming now into a box that can be opened layer by layer by its makers as well as the audience at once. Now, this whole process of opening, unfolding, unraveling, and extending is the way archivist processes the records, annotates the information therein, and make it accessible through new technologies now available to them. Randolph Jimerson, in one of his papers, had brought out a wonderful analogy of changing role of archives from being temples of power to a restaurant that allows mediation and interpretation. Archives then are not passive storehouses of old stuff, but active sites open to vital debate and transparent accountability. Sites where knowledge is actually now co-created. And here I would also want to bring in the important role that oral histories can play in making the archives an important tool to democratize the narrative of a business. There are not many business houses around India, and among them very few have initiated the oral history program. So corporate archivists cannot really lose out on these multiple voices, as they will help building a narrative of corporate life through all the strata. Now, we have so far interviewed more than 300 employees, including management, workers, staff, dealers, customers. And these interviews really provide us with a wealth of insightful information. And for some, actually, we don't even have the written records for, but they really reveal certain kind of information that's not existed earlier. And they are about the people's experiences at office spaces, because even the history of office spaces is worth really, actually can be really written if people are really interested in. And these individual stories from the corporate world offer interesting insights into a larger understanding of corporate culture, of not only the organization, but also of a country in general. And from a personal perspective, I actually find oral histories also foreground the tensions with which employees and managers negotiate every day, how their lives transform while they are carrying out what they may call a routine job. Now, these small details tell you about the structures at workplace, their networks, their hierarchies, also about the hidden voices at workplace, experiences women at workplace. We have interviewed many women, and there was one lady, Mani Thapar, who was the first employee of the Delhi branch. And she actually narrated how that when she wanted to go on a maternity leave, because there were no women earlier, there was no policy in place. So she went to the labor office, got all the details, then sent to the headquarters, then headquarters formulated a policy, and then that's how the maternity leave was granted. So these are really very interesting hidden stories that started coming out because of these oral memoirs. And let me give you some other glimpses into it. For example, you all might be knowing that Godrej manufactured the ballot boxes for the first election of independent India. And but we have only few records. But then we interviewed the plant manager who actually supervised the whole manufacturing, and he actually started telling us how they were ready to do it in 3 shifts, because that was the special order that was given. People were excited about the independence and the first election, so obviously people were ready to complete this order in 3 shifts, and some of the workers used to sleep in the factory, because that was the first factory that was that started with manufacturing of ballot boxes in Vikhroli. Now, these are the little details that we wouldn't have got in the written records, and these experiences would have gone missing if we had not interviewed them. And there are also like few which I would like to mention, that when we were doing the interviews at Guwahati branch and with the dealers in the Northeast, there were really very interesting things that came up. Mr. Arun Roy, the branch manager at Guwahati branch, joined the branch in 1980s, and his appointment was soon after the ethnic violence against Bengalis that was rampant during the period 1979 to 83. Now, he told us that while recruiting him, the company also has to and consult the local advice. And he says, and I quote, that at that time there were problems in Assam regarding recruitment of non-locals, non-Assamese. They recruited me. They had taken the advice of local advice also. They had seen all my papers, and after confirming that he was not an outsider but a local, the employment was granted. So how actually these kind of political and social upheavals can influence and impact the businesses, it's really a wonderful example. Now, this Assam-Bengali rivalry was pretty evident in professions, in government services, and in some localities in small trade only. Now, this conflict have been viewed as essentially economic, but it was Marwadis and not Bengalis who controlled Assam's wholesale trade, maybe industry, rice mills, oil mills, godowns, tea marketing. And the government report of 1906 mentions that Marwadis have monopolized practically whole trade of Assam Valley. They even settled in the midst of a jungle and on the paths leading to the jungle in order to trade with the hill people. They used to exchange rubber waxes, rhino horns, tusks, hand-woven clothes for rice, salt, opium, cotton garments. Now, one of the Godrej dealers belonging to the Marwadi community had an interesting tale about his grandfather, Bajranglal Modi, who migrated from Rajasthan to Dibrugarh in Assam around this period, where he started trading the lubricant oil. He used to travel 30 kilometers just to collect this oil and then used to trade this to locals. Gradually, he flourished, and then later in 1938, he started automobile business under the name Phoenix Motor Works, and later in 1950s took up the Godrej dealership. Now, even during the time of the ethnic violence that Mr. Roy was talking about, Marwadis were rarely the target. Vikas Modi, grandson of Bajranglal Modi, recounted in the oral history that up till 1990, actually there was no problem in Assam and businesses were flourishing. In fact, during late 80s, if we are going to the market, we never used to remove keys from the car. It was that safe, and I unquote. So, however, the period of insurgency later on forced them to move to Kolkata for a period of a year as no business activity could be carried out. And he remembered that it was difficult to do business and we were scared to move out also, but somehow we could manage. For a businessman, it was more of insecurity. Government was helpless. Business people were so scared that they were not approaching government. Whoever approached, they provided security. That time, more of sales staff was working and we were working behind the curtains. Sometimes a lot of strikes were also there. This resulted in delays in delivery of products, and it was difficult to say if materials would reach. It wasn't easy to track the movement in absence of mobile. Now, these are the stories then that tell you about also the stories of migration, also the studies of the small traders that were working there, and how actually the political events are impacting the whole businesses. And so this is how actually the oral histories can really help you in filling the gaps that are there in the written records of any institution or a business. So in absence of written records, so we have to really completely rely on oral histories to chronicle the history of Navganis. Now, this is a community who belongs to a village near Pune from Shirwar. And they joined Godrej in 1940s because they were really sturdy workers. And they actually started working with Godrej as loaders. And they even this is like a fourth generation working with Godrej. And even today, their skills of moving heavy products with just using the tools like simple tools like logs, the wooden logs, and the rope. It's really remarkable and it is really unparalleled. No damage is done when they are moving the safe from anywhere. Now, these are really very skilled people in the transporting the heavy product, but there was no record of how actually they joined, why they are called Navganis. So this was really intriguing, and therefore we started interviewing them. And then there are like really interesting stories that came up, and then we also held an exhibition on our premises, celebrating what they are really meant for the company and their contribution to the company. And they were really, felt really overwhelmed by this whole gesture of like having an exhibition on them. So these are actually the little things that can make the history and the archives more inclusive, bringing more stories to it. And so this is how actually, this is just a glimpse of what corporate oral histories can reveal. and how valuable they can be in understanding the history of corporate life. However, one cannot really overlook a danger while doing this corporate history. One cannot ignore these personal memories or anecdotal details as they contribute to the transgenerational knowledge of the organization. And these individual stories emerging out of employees' own experiences adds to the collective experience. Pulling multiple voices into one coherent narrative is really a difficulty, and it is really a challenge. And also enabling something other than the corporately sanitized history to emerge is also where business archives are facing the challenge. But then I think just providing the multiple voices, providing multiple stories can help democratizing the archives more. Now here, involving and encouraging different communities to engage with your archives also becomes more important to discover new meanings in your records and archives. Hence, the archivist should now proactively engage with historians, writers, journalists, artists, designers, storytellers, whoever is interested in the past, to encourage the use of archives for communicating hidden stories in their repository. Now, in our case, this constant mediation and communication with our researchers has helped us in tremendous ways. Now, in the initial stage of building the archives, when we were focusing more on organizing the material at hand and exploring new resources to understand Godrej's business journey, and when we were busy with regularizing the archival processes, we got a call from Professor Douglas Haynes of Dartmouth College, who was in India for researching for his book tracing the history of consumer patents between 1915 to 1950. He was particularly interested in the soap manufacturers and their advertisements. Now, Godrej being the soap manufacturer, he thought of trying his luck with our archives, and we had just started in that year. At that point, our collection wasn't much, and we could only offer 5 files on the soaps dealing with the sales figure. However, as we discuss about his research using old advertisements and resources he was trying to look for, this whole discussion and dialogue with the researcher really helped us in understanding the trends in business history and also in understanding the expectations of the researcher and what kind of data they are searching for. And historians' queries actually really keep us on toes and made us realize that archives is actually a collective experience and it cannot be restricted to just the company records embodying the decision and development of a company policy. But as the queries started pouring, we realized that what they seek is not just the factual content, but also their impact on national and local economies and the lives of the stakeholders. So this challenged the acquisition policy that we had, and we started expanding the scope of collection to include many such narratives defining the correlation between the business and the ecosystem it operates in. Now, this also led us to look outside the business for records, but also at the annotations that we were providing for our records. So researchers' expectation led us into a continuous process of revisiting our metadata, enriching the same for facilitating efficient search. Our attitudes about access also transformed. We started relying on more digital content so that we can make it accessible more. Expectations really help us in appraising our records, and the most in demand category also was formulated. Now, but this is actually the traditional role of giving the information to the users of the archives. So apart from this knowledge retrieval role, now archives and archivists can no more find the comfort in the four walls of the repository, and they cannot really wait for the users to come to the archives to make use of the archival collections that they have. But they actually now have to start proactively work along with the historians to reinvent the new meanings about the past. Now, archivists cannot only assist a company to sort, select, and store historically important records, but they should play a proactive role in communicating the strategic role it can play in assessing the impact government, institution, or business has on the society, its people, and the country in general, and providing insights to the future leaders. The task is not at all simple, as one must keep reinventing the ways to make history relevant for today. Now, archives, therefore, have to be now the site of knowledge creation to fill in the gaps in the narrative to bring forth the marginalized stories into a clinical and confirmed narrative. Now, proactively encouraging research should therefore be considered as one of the primary objectives of the archives. For example, we also tried few things like book on history of typewriters in India was an outcome of such effort to bring together historians, journalists, writers, sociologists to talk about different facets of typewriter along with the public history of and memories about the typewriter. Now, in this book, we consciously we never wanted only this book to be on the Godrej typewriter because we thought that it is just then will become a one story of a one business group. But I think what we need is to contextualize it in the Indian context. And therefore, we need more stories about the typewriter of the other manufacturers as well, and also how the typewriter as a product has impacted the social lives, and also how it had become, it had given actually a lot of entrepreneurial opportunities for millions of Indians. And we actually wanted to assess that whole thing. So we actually had the historian on board. We also had a lot of other journalists and writers on board. And also, this book also included the public memories and the public histories of the typewriter and the history of the public spaces where the typewriter can even be seen today. Now, this is how actually was our attempt to democratize the whole narrative and not just restrict it to simply the Godrej story. Now, the next project that we are working on is going to be the seating in India. So this is actually trying to trace the history of how the seating or how the products which we use for seating, like chair, have evolved. What really throne means and what it really signifies, what a chair means. So these are the aspects. So this is going to be the design history and also the socio-cultural history of how the seating defines certain things will be chronicled, and hopefully by next year this will be out. Now, we also realize that we also have to constantly engage and encourage researchers to use our archives more. And we shouldn't be waiting for them to come when they will have a research topic. So what we did was we started the 2 fellowships and scholar in residence program to encourage research in various aspects of business and industrial history. So we had one scholar who was trying to trace the history of training, industrial training in India from 1940s to the present date. We also have Dr. Lakshmi Subramaniam as scholar in residence from 2018 to 2020, and she would be actually tracing the social lives of 3 products, and that is refrigerator, chair, and stove. So these are actually working with these historians is really helping us to read. Sorry about that. So these are the fellowships and the scholar in residence program that are actually helping us to reinvent and relook at our collections and study the various aspects of business and industrial history. Now, for this, we also have now deviated from the traditional role of archiving and only the non-current records, because that's how traditionally the archives was always looked upon as. But now we are actually also trying to proactively document the present, because after 10 years, this information just vanishes. And especially these are the challenges of the digital world, because Indians are really, I would say, everyone is obsessed with the digital technologies, and everyone So there are actually the problems of the digital technologies as well, because everyone wants it to be all the information a click away. But there are actually the challenges that the archives always face, because maintaining a digital infrastructure is really very expensive. And that's why, not everything can be digitized, because you need to invest into the server space, and you need to maintain the infrastructure, take multiple backups. Then there are a lot of format changes in the digital world that keeps happening. And therefore, it is really very essential that, because there are pressures from the researchers that, we should be able to give everything, a click away. But then there are certain challenges that even the corporate archives really face today. And therefore, I think, but considering that, we have also therefore started documenting the present records because, especially the emails, that is going to remain as a challenge, and we are still trying to find out the solution that how these emails can be really archived, because earlier when people used to put the papers in the files and the files can remain, but the digital world is not like that. There is an abyss and everything can go and disappear into the whole digital abyss that we have, and maybe 10 years later we will have a digital dark age. So that's why actually, we are taking steps, and these are the challenges that any archivist now has to really face and be ready for. And that's what actually how to document the current digital data that is being created in multiple formats, multiple copies every day. I think consuming a lot of gigabytes, and that's how actually what we need to really brace ourselves for. But even in spite of these challenges, we are trying our best to even keep the current records, which are not really old. So even a 1 year and a 2 year old records, the business archives are trying to keep. Whether they will be soon available for the research, that is obviously depends on the confidentiality of information which are there in the content of the record. But still, most of the records which are like non-confidential in nature are available for the research. But the current records is going to be the challenge, but we have started the process so that the information is not lost to time. So now, after looking at all these things, we can actually say, and then there are also like some of the visitors who come to our archives. For example, they are also interested in and they wanted to know about what they did in the company. For example, there was one lady from UK. She had come to India and she said that my father used to work only for these many years in the company, whether you have anything on them. And we were really astonished to receive such a request. But then we went through our HR records and we found the file on him, where there was like the application written by him, the job call, the call letter that was sent to him, the appointment letter that was there. And interestingly, we also found a photograph of him playing in the company's cricket team. And she was really astonished to see that photograph because she never knew that he played cricket. And she said that my father never told me this. And this is really wonderful to see this picture. And so now actually the scope of business archives is also going beyond the academic and beyond the company information needs. And this is what something that we are really quite enthusiastic about, and we are really thrilled about that. There are so many possibilities in one record that we have in the business archives. Then there are a lot of designers who are now have started approaching us. They want to study the old catalogs because they want to take an inspiration, and they also want to communicate that to the and communicate that and transform those ideas into a new product, which is completely an amazing thing that we experience for. Now there are artists who want to come and interpret our records in their own artistic ways, which are like amazing possibilities that are coming up. The corporate HR is now using the archives to communicate the values of the company to the new employees that are being recruited. And this kind of sense of belonging to be created using the history is also quite an amazing change that has happened, the way people are now treating the business archives is. So there are multiple possibilities and there are multiple researches that can be carried out using this rich resource at the business archives. And therefore, we are trying to make archives a more collaborative place where the archivist and the users, may it be designers, may it be artists, may it be researchers, may it be historians or anthropologists, they can actually be co-creating the knowledge that it tries to unfold. And that's how actually this changing role of the business archives is what looks promising. And that's actually where I would like to end my presentation with. And then if there are any questions that I would like to answer, because we, I think, have a half an hour to answer these questions. Hello?
Thank you, Vrinda. Thank you so much. I so enjoyed your talk, and I hope all the others who are listening you also had the same experience. Um, let's and of course, why not? So deep the piece of talk was, right? So let's keep the floor open for some questions. If our audience and the participants who are listening have some questions, they can float in. Um, Siona and Pamela can keep a track of it.
Yeah, so a question coming in like one question, ma'am, to you, like how archives as a repos history of primary
Mhm.
sources can be.
No, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I will repeat it for you, ma'am.
Yeah.
How archives as a repos history of primary sources can be used in all institutions.
Uh, okay, means what I understood about is how the archives are obviously the primary sources, and so they can be used. So means that depends on every archive's policy of access. So what we do is like researchers have to just uh, write to us and telling us about the topic that they are researching about, and then they can come and access our records. But that's how it is. And the institutions, as I've said, there are many institutions which haven't yet started the archives. So there are actually a lot of institutions which, as I've said, completed 50 years, 75 years. Like there are IIMs, there are IITs, there are universities, which might also be having really a rich resource of records. But these primary resources are right now not available because there is no process of archiving them at these institutions. So I think if every institute really takes up, then I think that would be a great primary resource that would be available. Is that what I think she was meaning, or hello?
Hello, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so I hope this is what the answer she was expecting, or if there is any confusion, she can rephrase the question and send me.
Yes, ma'am. Surely. Um, I guess it's clear enough for the viewer. Like they must have got a clear idea right now. Yes. So I can I go for the next one if it's okay with
Yes,
you?
yes. Yeah, yeah, sure.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So the next one is okay. Yes. Next one goes like this is um, can all institutions set up archives for their primary data? So this is the
Yeah, that's
question
what
coming in.
Yeah, so what she's asking is, can all the institutions can set up the archives? And the answer would be yes. If the
Okay.
institutions are willing to create a resource and are willing to spend on that resource, I think every institution should set up their archives. It is better that it is democratizing, or if they cannot, if they can actually just collect the records and send it to maybe the National Archives or say Nehru Memorial Library, even that is also possibility if they don't want to, what you can say, dedicate a resource for setting up the archives. But I think it is, I think, a necessity now that every institution sets up their own archives. Like abroad, every university has their archives. Means many of the researchers might be even visiting those archives. So it is really wonderful that universities, for example, we have colleges who have completed 100 years and they still don't have their own histories available. So I think the colleges, universities, any government, other institution should actually start setting up the archives if they are willing to dedicate to such a cause. So I think it is really important that these primary resources are being, because they might have been already lost few of the records. So it's better that we start now. Yes, Yona?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. That's really nice. Okay, so people, some viewers over here are asking us suggestions to keep
Mm-hmm.
collaborative archives in colleges.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one can also collaborate with different institutions and also start sharing their data with each other, so that there can be one platform where maybe all the institutions are having. But of course that will need lot of thinking, and I cannot really just give you offhand kind of an information about it. But yes, collaborations would really help. If there are any organizations that you can collaborate with, have these kind of archival contents available somewhere. For example, there was a very interesting project that had happened earlier, where there was an online platform that was created for documenting all the resources available all over the world on leprosy. And this was a very amazing project that I had witnessed many years back, almost like a decade ago, I would say. And then there is an online platform where they have actually tried to collaborate with different archives, having the data on the history of leprosy and the history of medicine on leprosy and everything about the leprosy. And they have actually one platform where all these archives are listed on that platform. So if even these kind of projects, collaborative projects, are being done, that would be really amazing. That if a particular, for example, if somebody is interested in history of sports, lot of sports organization can have a common platform and share their resources over there, so that researcher has to go only to that collaborated kind of a space and find out what kind of archives are available, what kind of documents and collections are available on this. Or even for the industrial history of Bombay, we do not have a museum on Bombay. We do not have any archive. Means we have, of course, the archive at Elphinstone College, but we do not have a story where we can talk about Bombay's development, and there is no museum. So all these resources, or even we don't have resources on textile history. So if there are any platforms which can be made available, there is a very wonderful online platform for labor history, and there are like a lot of oral histories that have been uploaded over there. So in case somebody is interested, you can go to that platform. So these kind of collaborative efforts are really needed. But again, you need that wherewithal to start this kind of an initiative, to start this kind of and you need a dedicated team to do this. So I think if people are willing to, I think the collaborations can definitely be possible.
Okay, okay, ma'am. That's really, really informative. That thing that you have provided us. It's really helpful, actually. Can we go for the last question, if you don't mind?
Yes, yes.
Okay, okay, fine. Yeah. So last question will be like, what technical setup is required for setting up institutional archive? What can we do about it?
Oh, okay. These are really very technical questions. I'll try and
Yeah,
explain it in
sure, sure.
simple ways possible. Yeah. So first of all, you need at least a team to start this whole initiative. I won't right now
Yeah.
actually say that you need a space to begin with, uh, but you need first the team, and you need like institutional backing to start this kind of a project. So you can. This might be the step one. Then also try and see that what kind of records that this institution generates, what kind of records are historically important to understand the history of institutions. So that will define the scope of the records that would be coming to this archive. So that I think will give you an idea that what kind of space you will need if these many records are going to come every year to the archives. You can start very simply in a very small room. Even a classroom kind of a space would actually is very easy to begin with. You need just one computer to begin with. Means I'm just saying that how humble beginning can be made, and that's how even we started with just three people on board, with just two computers and two cupboards. So that's how actually Godrej Archives also started with. Uh, and there is also like, the infrastructurally, people usually say that there is a need of say 24 hours AC. But if you cannot afford 24-hour AC, it is okay not to have AC. So these kind of, like, you can budget for that. So that's one technical requirement. If you don't have 24 AC, you should not have AC at all. So even a simple room with a good ventilation, without any direct sunlight, of course, is needed to start any archives. You need this little infrastructure, like of two people, two computers, maybe to begin with. You need the cupboards and the racks to store your records. But even to start this, I think the first step would be to understand what kind of records that you will be storing there. If you need to go for oral histories, then you need to invest into the digital recorder. And if you are in, if you have, you also have to record or um, at a certain kind of a quality you need. So you have to record it in a WAV format, and that will take a lot of digital space. So you have to also speak to your institution what kind of server space will be allocated to you if you want to like put these up on your digital infrastructure. As far as the physical records are concerned, you just need a clean space, good records, and a proper storage material which can keep the records safe. I can go into details about the archival storage because there are different kinds of storage. You need acid-free folders and acid-free boxes for storing the records. But if you don't have it, even that is okay. You can start with simple files and simple boxes because we have these kind of parallel archives in our archives as well. So it depends on the what kind of budget your institution is willing to support you with in the first year, and then accordingly you can plan that maybe in first year you will only spend in planning and locating the records, just like we did at the Godrej Archives. So first year I was operating only from a very small room, which was actually like a classroom size, with only 3-4 cupboards. But the first year we actually spent a lot on formulating the policy, formulating the processes, also deciding the scope of collection. That is, what kind of records we need. Do we need minutes of meetings? Do we need technical drawings? What kind of records we need? So those exercises have to be done in the first year. And once you know the scope of collection, once you know the extent of records that will be coming to you, then you can start planning your infrastructure maybe in second phase. So you can actually, the things that you need to know is first the storage space and the technical infrastructure. You don't have to really go for like digitization soon because digitization again will have the expenses. And right now, what most of the archives, whoever wants to start the archives, do is they just buy a scanner and start scanning at any resolution. Again, for the archival standards, resolutions are defined and they take a lot of space. Like even one scan will be like some 40 MB or 80 MB. Now, these kind of resolutions is what archives work with, but sometimes that we don't really take into consideration and just start scanning. So if you don't want to invest in really a good scanner and a higher end scanner, don't go for a scanning in the first year. So you have to just decide what you want to do in the phases, and then accordingly the requirements can be done. Of course, means I cannot tell you like in just 10 minutes that how you can really go. It depends on the kind of institution you work with, the kind of support that you have, the kind of budgets that are available to you. But I can only say that even if the budget is small, you can still start the initiative to build the archives. And especially now that you have digital platforms so easily available on your mobiles and laptops, I think these technologies can be used to simply like put up a website where all the institutional history can be like put or uploaded on the these digital platforms. So it's not really a very expensive thing, but what you need to do is first to plan and what are you really expecting from the archives. So I think so there are a lot of infrastructures that you need technically, but this is what I would tell you for the beginners. If like you have the budgets of say even the 2 lakhs, you can start setting up the archives for your institution. Yeah. Anything
Uh,
specifics if they want to ask, I can.
I think we have time, so we can take couple of questions.
Yeah,
I think
sure.
I can read one of it, which says like ways and means to get the primary sources for the college to benefit research work.
Oh, um, so if they are writing a college history, or that's what they mean?
If Rojapu Lucky, who has raised this question, can specify, we can make out. Otherwise, this is what is the question being framed: ways and
So
means
ways and means.
to get the primary sources for the college to benefit research work. So basically, he's talking about how to get
Mhm.
access over such sources.
Access for the college.
Maybe a repository for the college or something like that. I'm just trying to comprehend that from
Okay,
the question.
yeah, yeah, sure. No, I would actually take it as if they want to say write a history of a college, then how they
Oh
can
yeah,
actually go about
institutional.
finding the primary resources. So when it actually means actually the college can actually initiate it with easily because they have a great resource in form of students. Um, and if you can actually create a team, say of like history students, have like bunch of them, and also like so how we actually started at Godrej was like we tried to understand the whole structure of the organization. Then we listed down, what are the businesses, what are the products, what are the different departments that work. Then what each business does, what kind of records that are available on each product, or what kind of records are available on each department. So when it comes to college, I think the best way is to first understand the structure of the college, and if that and also write a timeline of the college. Now, these are the first two exercises that we did at Godrej: understand the organizational structure and understand the timeline of the college, and then also list out the milestones for it and start looking for if there are any records corresponding to these milestones are available at the college. If not at the college, then start listing out the resources from where you can, or the different sources from where you can get these records. Now, the best is the alumni. So, alumni is the best way to actually reach out for. Many of the colleges have the alumni association. If that association can take a lead and actually make an appeal to all the alumni, if they have anything on college history, any photographs, any literature, any syllabus of the yesteryears, they can actually, start sending them to the college. So this is how actually, you can start. So alumni is the one resource from where you can get a lot of information. Then there are a lot of places around the college. For example, around my college, there were a lot of eateries around. So there were people, students who will be always at these eateries sharing their experiences. So even these eateries were actually really a formed a really core part of the college culture. So if there are any such cultures available around the college, not just about the college, but even these people. So you have to just identify different sources from where you can get the information. So one was the alumni, one was the professors, like if there were like ex-professors to start listing out them. If you have what you can say, if you have any connections with, like, say, for example, if you have the old syllabus with you, even that can actually be a very important resource. Or even the annual calendars of the colleges can also be a very useful resource to find out who were the professors then, and then get the information from there as well. So there are different ways, and different people who are associated with the college. Even the administrative staff, they can actually tell you where the records are, because they might be using a lot of records themselves, which were about the administrative things. So they would be the great resource to find out. But I think alumni is the best way to start with. Even there might be some canteens in the colleges who also can talk about the food culture that college had. So even those kind of aspects can come in. One can start interviewing a lot of the neighborhood people about the college. So that also can be a very interesting resource for the college history. So there are different ways and means, and how you actually look at the college history is from the different angles you can actually pursue and then identify the sources for the college as well. So it depends on college to college, and then there will be like a lot of cultural associations in the college if they have any records on it. And then maybe if you can have a room where all these can be deposited, if there is a team who can actually sort this out and accession them and list them out, I think that is very critical, because collection is one thing, but then documenting everything that is coming to the archives is the most important core activity of the archives is. So considering that, you can actually develop, you can actually list out the sources. And I think As a historians, I think it would be really very easy for the teachers and the professors who can actually, list out all these sources if you want to understand the history of a college. So there are like different ways, and I think they can just set up one website along with the alumni, appealing to people that, if they have anything on the college, they can actually share with you. So those things can actually easily be done now. Yeah. I hope this is what actually he was expecting. Yeah.
Yeah, he little reframed it, but I think you have covered up all the
Mhm.
concerns he had raised. So you're getting many appreciative messages also.
Oh, thank
People
you.
have, yeah, so they are saying thank you for this insightful talk and lecture. They are appreciating you variously differently.
Okay. Oh, I'm
So
really glad.
yeah, we are also happy to have you. uh,
Yeah. Thank you. Thank
Siona,
you, Char.
Siona, can you take over?
Yes, yes, surely I'll do it. Ma'am, really, it was really very informative, very informative session that you have shared with us. We are glad that you were with us on the board. Thank you for the solutions and the answers that you have given our viewers for their questions. Um, Viewers, thank you for staying tuned with us. People who have just joined us, I would like to repeat that this is Vrinda Patare, ma'am, with us. Her topic was on. Her topic was on knowledge of retrieval to knowledge to creation. I hope everyone have enjoyed. So this is, let me again tell you that this is a faculty development first program in collaboration with the Dec- uh, Directorate Archaeological and Museum Government of Maharashtra. Thank you so much, ma'am. Like, I would like to proceed with the next personality research keynote speaker with us. That is Michel Bovin. Michel Bovin is a French historian and anthropologist who specializes in South Asia, trained in contemporary history, current director of research at French National Center for Scientific Research. Michelle Bowen, I would love you to be on the board. The floor is yours. His paper he'll be presenting his paper on ethnography and the issues of sources in historical research, South Asia as a case study. Michelle Bowen, the floor is yours. Thank you. Okay, so he's joining in few minutes. I hope all our viewers are really finding it informative and really interesting with this topic that we are discussing today. Stay tuned. We'll be soon getting connected with our next speaker of the day. Yes.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning, Michelle Bowen. We are happy to have you. Um,
Thank you.
because I'm really waiting to listen to your presentation. It's going to be really exciting. Sir, the board, welcome to the board once again. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And first, I'd like you to know that I am quite honored and thankful to Kaash Foundation Mumbai and Department of Archaeology and Museum, Government of Maharashtra, to have invited me to deliver this talk with this faculty development program on historians, compass, and tools. And of course, I am especially grateful to Avkat Jadav and you, Chaya. Yeah, so really, I believe, I am convinced that the issue addressed in this conference is of the utmost importance. I'm talking about methodology and history, and especially about the issue of the sources, because it compels us to question how we implement research on a given subject. And also, on the other hand, of course, the methodology that will implement can determine or not the perspective we adopt to deal with the same subject. It is, of course, materially impossible for a single individual to master all the theories or the concept or the methods related to his or her disciplines. And to restrict these questions to the field of history, let us try to see how the researcher can know first the sources, can identify the sources that will allow him to develop his research. And like all the social sciences, history is confronted with this question of sources. I would say that the question of the sources can be divided into two stages. Firstly, the identification and collection of sources, and secondly, the reading of interpretation, what the social sciences call analysis. In other terms, the main point is to find out or to decide what is the most suitable form of analysis to produce the most objective and informative analysis. It is true that each of the social sciences can be subdivided into different categories, often informed by the other disciplines. For example, we can talk about political history, economic history, or social or religious history. But the rise of the social sciences is still recent, and therefore their evolution is still far from being completed. In the case of history, another issue that overlaps with the previous ones is that of the credibility that it is relevant to give to the sources. Indeed, whether a source is written, oral, or material, one must never forget that the one who produced this source had an objective. He or she wanted to achieve a goal through the mode of expression he or she have chosen. It can be a law, a poem, an inscription, a monument, or anything else. So I want also to use my own experience and practice to show that in some cases, historical and ethnographic inquiry are complementary. I want to say that one can compensate for the shortcomings of the other, and it is on the basis of concrete cases that I will deploy my demonstration. I shall focus mostly on two research projects I have conducted. One, on the one hand, there is a Sufi pilgrimage site where historical sources show a serious deficit. And on the other hand, there is another research on the sacred figure of Julilal. More specifically, it reflects on the potential role that interdisciplinarity can play in compensating for the absence of deficit of the historical sources. Also, I see two main blind spots in the process of collecting data. One is related to colonial sources and the other to orality, because during my research, I had to deal with these two blind spots, especially if you work on the period like the 19th century. So these blind spots were difficult to tackle in the process of collecting data because, of course, the main questions regarding these issues are how to use colonial sources and how to deal with orality when you are working on the 19th or early 20th century. But before turning to the data I have used and I still use, I want to deal with what I call the history of history, because historical knowledge is the result of a process. And in the European languages, the word history or historia, comes from a Greek word. And it is interesting to know that the first meaning of historia in Greek is survey, investigation, or even inquiry. Thus, to do history first is to conduct an investigation almost in the police sense of the word. It is said that Herodotus, a Greek historian, was the first and very often is called the father of history. Notwithstanding, for centuries in Europe as well as in South Asia, historia was limited to historiography, which was itself a production of power. The first historians were panegyrists. They were prizing mostly the king's achievements. This trend of history lasted centuries, and it was dominating the historical narratives everywhere in the world. Historical discourse could be produced as a written archive or an oral archive on or an archive resulting from inscriptions on a monument or any material object. Although the historical knowledge is the product of a long process, a number of groundbreaking stages should be highlighted. And in India, especially, many historians, sociologists, and anthropologists played a crucial role in the development of the historical knowledge. Among them was Govind Sadavish Guriye, who was the head of the Department of Sociology in the University of Bombay. And so he was really a forerunner in different fields, especially with his book he published in 1933 with the title Untouchable Classes and Their Assimilation in Hindu Society. Another very important movement related to history and also related to the relationship between history and sociology and anthropology was, of course, the subaltern studies, very famous funding about other, among other, but by Ranajit Guha. This movement also was very important, and it started a real renewal of the historical knowledge as well as other fields of the social sciences. And finally, I want to mention another historian. She's Romila Thapar, because once again, she did such an important work, and especially, of course, for the historical knowledge of India. And I just want to mention maybe one of the last books titled The Past Before Us, Historical Tradition of Early North India, published in 2013. In this groundbreaking work, Romila Thapar addresses the most important issue. It is related to the claim that India lacks historical writings, because for her, this issue distracts us for a far more pertinent question, that is, how to recognize the historical sense of society whose past is recorded in ways very different from European conventions. So, of course, other groundbreaking moments occurred outside of India in the field of history and also regarding the relationship between these different social sciences, such as anthropology. And in this respect, also, I'd like to say a few words about a French movement known as the Annals School of History, which was created by a French scholar and especially by one of them named Fernand Braudel. Yeah, so Fernand Braudel perceived simultaneous presence of durations in history that he distinguished scientifically. For him, there was a long, multisecular, a short dimension of history, which could be a few decades, and also events of a year or even a month. Historical analysis thus had to confront itself with different rhythms in order to perceive what is structural, conjectural, or simply event driven. This movement of history highlighted how history opened itself to the growing other social sciences, especially ethnology, sociology, or economy also. And Fernand Braudel was nonetheless mostly interested by what I call macro history. And for example, in his book, Grammar of Civilizations, published in 1987, he divided the world in a number of great civilizations. For him, a civilization also has structures which are made of the, I quote, constraints exerted by spaces, social hierarchy, collective psyche, economic necessities. A last scholar I'd like to mention to prove how there is a history of history and also a kind of anthropology of anthropology is named Louis Dumont. It is not because he was the founder of the research center to which I belong, the Center for Indian and South Asian Studies. He founded it in 1955. Dumont was anthropologist, and he was the author of an important book titled Homo Hierarchicus, published in 1966. The subtitle of his book is The Caste System and Its Implication. Of course, it is not the place here to discuss in detail this book, but rather I want to undermine that Dumont used Godey's work published in 1932 under the title of Caste and Race in India. For Dumont, Godey has put his finger on a key phenomenon that can be called caste substantiation. It is a transition from a fluid structural universe where the emphasis is on interdependence when there is no privilege level to a universe of impenetrable blocks that are self-sufficient, a universe where caste appears as, I quote, it is Dumont's lecture of Gaulier, as a collective individual, as a substance. Yeah, so I shall use Dumont's anthropology as a kind of transition to turn that to my own data and to the issue I've met in collecting data and, of course, for the interpretation of this data. As I put in the beginning, mostly I am working on 19th and 20th century. And interestingly, I focus on the province of Sindh and on the Sindhi. And there is a quite interesting point about Sindh and the Sindhi regarding the sources. It is a kind of lack of written sources until the coming of the British, until the 19th century. Of course, you can find data related to historiography, and especially these books, these manuscripts are written in Persian until the 19th century. But if you want to deal with ethnology, with anthropological issue, for example, related to authority, the production of authority, the transmission of authority, and also to the making of communities. So really it's difficult to find data before the 19th century. In this respect, so regarding ethnology related to Sindh and the Sindhi, it is very interesting also to observe that there is a kind of simultaneity between the birth of ethnology and anthropology and colonization. And for example, in relation to Sindh and the Sindhi, there is a British officer named Richard Francis Burton, who was very important for the knowledge of Sindh. So Richard Burton was an officer. He was lieutenant and then captain in the East India Company Army. But also in his books, in the books he published on Sindh, he published 5 books on Sindh. He claimed to be an ethnologist, and he used this word. It was around the first reports he sent to the British government were written in the late 1830s. So already he used the word ethnologist. And later on, in 1863, Richard Burton was one of the founders of the Anthropological Society of London. So, of course, we have to look in detail at what Burton meant with using this word of ethnology and of anthropology. And obviously, if we read his books about Sindh, for him, claiming to be an ethnologist allowed him to break with Orientalist practices. Especially, Burton was very critical with the most praised British scholar, William Jones, who was the founder of the Asiatic Society of Bengal in 1784. And this Asiatic Society of Bengal was the first institution devoted to the study of the Orient, of Orientalism. Burton criticized Jones because for him, Jones was not interested by the people themselves. And also, for him, Jones was exploiting the local scholars, and more than one. For example, Jones claimed to have written a grammar of Persians, but now we know that, in fact, this grammar of Persians had been written by an Indian scholar. And so Jones appropriated this book. And so it is also very meaningful that Burton is one of the only European fellows to find thanks to Edward Said's eye. Edward Said is the main author of the post-colonial studies, and he published a very important book titled Orientalism in 1978. So regarding Burton, Said is almost laudatory about it because, as you know, one of the theses of Edward Said is that the European built a new science named Orientalism, but it was mostly a knowledge made to increase the European control of a number of countries from North Africa to the Middle East and to South Asia. So if a side is very positive toward Burton, it means mostly that Burton, of course, was a kind of ethnologist. But of course, also, the works of Richard Burton are marked by their time, and especially by the imperial ideology of Great Britain. And we can see this in Burton's writings, for example, with the terminology he used to designate communities. Also, sometimes you can have very contradictory statements about, for example, Sufi poetry in Sindhi. Sometimes he can speak of the marvelous verses of the Sufi poetry, of the magnificent specimen, but also he is very negative toward the vernacular languages because for him, as it was the case for many British in this time, they always compare the vernacular languages with Persian, and they compare the vernacular Sufi poetry with Persian poetry. And so, for example, Burton stated that one main Sufi poet in Sindhi named Shah Abdul Latif, he said that Shah Latif had, I quote, the disadvantage of being faced with the difficulties of a barbaric dialect, he speaks of Sindhi, elaborated for people without imagination. And also, he claimed that the literary quality of Shah Abdul Latif's work is not that good. And he said, I quote, his ornaments are mainly alliterations, puns, and other puns. But also another point to be investigated is how did Burton collect his data? Because in one of his books he published in 1851 and named Sindh and the inhabitant of the Indus Valley, he gives a lot of detail about the different communities in Sindh, the different Muslim community, the different Hindu communities, and unfortunately, he did not always communicate how he was able to collect these sources. Of course, he knows colonial literature regarding India. And for example, as I put before, he didn't hold William Jones in high esteem. He preferred works based on ethnographic data, such as books published in 1832, for example, by Aircloth. Regarding Sindh, some of the footnotes put by Burton in his book indicate that his informant were usually the leaders of the communities he's writing about. But it means that he used to meet the head of the different community on which he wanted to write. And for example, if a community was divided in different sections, he would inquire with the different sections. And when Burton is not objective with a character or with a group, his subjectivity appears in the excessive terms he uses. And sometimes also he can explain his position. I mean, he can explain why he used excessive terms to qualify a leader. So Um, yeah, so this almost, I would say, ethnographic book were published by Burton, especially in the 1850s. And also, we have to note that Burton was mastering Sindhi and a number of other vernacular languages. So it is maybe the first book we can qualify as being both historical knowledge and also ethnographical knowledge. But regarding this relationship between the spread of ethnography and also the spread of British colonization, according to the British scholar Chris Fuller, the organization of the census in India from 1871 1872 onwards, gave a new impetus to the colonial knowledge of the population of India, with the focus of the ethnographical approach. And also another most important British was Denzil Ibbetson, was superintendent for the Punjab, who published a book in 1883 named Punjab Caste. So for Chris Fuller, Ibbetson's book was the foundational text for what he called an official anthropology. Introducing the chapter on religion, Ibbetson observed that most of the books already published had failed to describe the everyday religion as practiced by the people. For him, it was extremely difficult to classify the people by religion. Two other main points in Ibbetson's vision are related to the issue of the social stratification. The first point he claimed is that the theory of caste was predicated on evolutionism, the dominant paradigm of social theory. And the second point is related to the racial theory, according to which the speakers of Aryan or Indo-European languages belong to a common Aryan race, and that in ancient times, fair-skinned Aryan tribesmen from Central Asia have invaded India, of course. So other British officers were the heralds of official anthropology, were in touch with founding scholars of both anthropology and Orientalism. And for example, Herbert Risley corresponded with E.B. Taylor, one of the founders of anthropology in UK, as well as with Max Muller, a leading scholar regarding the sacred text of Hinduism. So what is very interesting is to observe how finally ethnographical knowledge and ethnography as a social science, if this expression was not used, but this ethnographical knowledge was used also by the British, by the imperial power in India. And so very soon, maybe from almost the first census conducted in India, the British identified caste as a key category for studying the Indian population. But finally, in another very important book published by Nicola Dirks in 2001 and named Castes of Mind, Colonialism and the Making of Modern India. So Nicola Dirks states that anthropology became, I quote, the principal colonial modality of knowledge and rule. And also, he states that by the late 19th century, the colonial state can be characterized as the ethnographic state. So it is very obvious that ethnography as a nation new knowledge was used by the British power. So now I'd like to say a few words about my own research, and especially regarding the issue of collecting data and how to deal with the data you have collected. But if I spoke about this simultaneous growth of the British domination and the birth and the spread of ethnography as a social science. So it is because we are, of course, depending on our sources to devote an understanding and an analysis of our data. And so in some part of South Asia, such as Sindh, the main issue is that the first data you can collect are the colonial data. And so it is a main point to address to find out how to deal with this colonial data, and if it is not possible to find other kind of data to counterbalance the colonial discourse. Yeah, so now I want to focus on a research program I was heading with a team of French and other scholars about a city, so in Sindh province in Pakistan. And the name of this city is Sewan Sharif. It is a very famous city now because it is where a Sufi saint named Lal Shahbaz Qalandar, who died supposedly in 1274, is buried. So this project was conducted with different scholars with different specialities. There were anthropologists, historians, geographers, sociologists, and even architects. The main issue until to deal with was to understand, how the development of a pilgrimage to the tomb of the Sufi, Lal Shahbaz Qalandar, how the development of this pilgrimage was related to the urban society, what was the impact of this pilgrimage of the local urban society of Sewan Sharif, and finally also how this pilgrimage, the growth of the pilgrimage, had an impact of the different communities which were making the local society. So the first issues, of course, was when you start a research program, you want to look at the sources that are available and further historical sources. And in the case of Sewan, and in the case of the figure of Lal Shahbaz Qalandar, there is a lack of sources because you can find some mention of Lal Shahbaz Qalandar in historical sources, and especially starting in the 14th century. But when I speak of mention, you can find one sentence only mentioning him, and that's it. And also, you can find some inscription of monuments, but very brief. So it's very difficult, finally, to learn about his life and why he went to settle in Sewan Sharif, which was an important city because it is on the bank of the Indus River. And so since antiquity, it was an important city. And of course, also how to deal with the lack of sources. You can try the oral traditions. And so you have to collect a lot of narratives, of different narratives among the local population. And sometimes some books were published about Lal Shahbaz and Sevan Sharif, but not before the 20th century. The first book totally devoted to Lal Shabazz as a local figure was published in the early 20th century. And dealing with oral tradition is also another kind of challenge because there are many different narratives related to this figure, related to Lal Shabazz calendar. And of course, the local society of Sewan Sharif is made of different community. And I would say that every community provide a specific narrative related to Lal Shabazz. And every community wants, to some extent, appropriate itself Lal Shabazz calendar as being one of them, or the narrative of a given community will state that Lal Shabazz has very special relationship with the community. So dealing with oral tradition, of course, is a very important issue. But I would say that even in the case of Sewan Sharif, it means spending many time in the field work and also to have many people to help you to collect all these narratives. And when you have many narratives, and sometimes with main contradiction, also it's another challenge to try to work with these oral narratives. So these oral narratives, of course, they can be taken both, I would say, as adding to the historical knowledge of Lal Shabazz and Old Sewan, and also as a kind of ethnographic data. But to know more about this issue of the impact of the pilgrimage to Lal Shabazz tomb on the local society, of the governance, but also of the social hierarchy among the local society, it was also important to devote ethnographical observation, and especially there was some main events that were very informative. I would take only one example of this event. There are first the different procession. The different procession, what do I mean? Because, yes, of course, in the year, in 1 year, there are different processions which are organized sometimes by the leading communities who are involved in the management of the pilgrimage itself, but also other more peripheral community. They are organizing their own procession, but of course, I call them peripheral communities because if you look at the map of the cities, you know, the tomb of Lal Shabazz, the Mazar, is in the heart of the city, and there are different like circle of the dominant community. And when you go far from the Mazar, you have what I call peripheral communities. And I use the word peripheral especially with a geographical meaning. So the most important is that the study of this procession provide a lot of information, and especially regarding to the relationship between the communities, because finally the procession has like tools for a group, for a social group, to show its command, its importance in the local society. And I will say a few words about the main event. It is, I would say, the festival, the annual festival. This festival, Mela, is commemorating the death of Lal Shabazz calendar. And so the festival lasts a number of days, but 3 days are especially important. These 3 days, communities use to organize procession, and so these communities, they start from their house or from their Sufi place, and they take Mendi in procession to the tomb of Lal Shabazz calendar. So they take the Mendi. It means that it is a symbol of wedding, because according to the Sufi belief, in fact, death is when the Sufi merge with God. And so the Mendi, the henna, is the symbol finally of the wedding of the Sufi with God, etc. So this procession arranged for taking the Mendi from a given place in the city to the tomb of Lal Shabazz calendar were very interesting. And as I said, there are 3 processions, 3 different days. So the first procession is organized, is led by a Sayyid family, named Lakhari Sayyid. And for the Muslim, the Sayyid are the descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. So it is, of course, very meaningful that this family is conducting the Mendi on the first day of the festival. And they take in a big procession this Mendi. It is the head of the family who is taking the Mendi, and also is not going directly from his Haveli to Lal Shabazz tomb. It's very close. So he's going in different streets of the city, and especially in throughout the narrow lanes of the city of Seran, because the heart of the city is made of very narrow lanes. And during this, the Sayyid and his family and his followers are visiting different places in relation where with Lal Shabazz. Lal Shabazz is supposed to have performed such miracle in such place. So it is the first procession. And the second and the third day, the procession of the Mendi are conducted by Hindu family, the second day and the third day. So there is 2 local Hindu family from Sewan who are conducting the Mendi procession from their place to the tomb of Lal Shabazz calendar. It's very interesting, and also it's a question to know why this Hindu family are conducting the Mendi on the second and on the third day. If you look at the archives related to Sevan in ante-partition, before partition, you can see that about half of the population of Sevan was Hindu, but also during partition, most of the Hindu population went to India. But still, you have a Hindu community of Sewan. And so what is interesting is that I would say, despite partition and migration, still the local tradition was maintained, because according to the oral tradition collected there among many different people from Sevan, it was from the time of Lal Shabbat that the Hindu community was associated with the management of the Darbar. And this Hindu also had welcomed Lal Shabbat himself. And so this system, what we can call, is still maintained. So this is the first procession related to the Mendi, but it is the most important event during the festival. And I would give another example of procession. And also this other example is interesting, I would say. It is important because it shows also the main role in the study of history of what I call material culture. And in the case of Lal Shabazz calendar, we can say that this material culture is made especially of relics. Relics, they are objects which are said to have been Lal Shabazz object. And in the Sufi world, there is an object which is very important. It is called the kashkul or the kishti. It is an object where it is said that Lal Shabazz calendar used to beg for food. Also, he was using this relic, this kishti, to drink, etc. And the kishti, among the different Sufi places settled all around Lal Shabazz tomb, is a main important object. So it is used as a kind of legitimacy for the different Sufi auspices all around the tomb of Lal Shabazz calendar. And it is really the symbol of the domination of a given community. And it is the same Sayyid community which is leading the Mendi on the first day of the festival, who own and who keeps the kishti. And also during different moments of the year, but including the time of the Mela, this Sayyid family are organizing procession of the kishti. And the kishti, this symbol of Lal Shabazz calendar, is conducting through a procession through the different followers, Sufi followers, important Sufi followers of this Sayyid family. And for example, there is another Sufi place, Sufi Dargah. It is named the Dargah of Bodlo Baha. So Bodlo Baha was said to be the main disciple of Lal Shabazz calendar, but the Sayyid is conducting the kishti, Lal Shabazz calendar kishti, from his place to this dargah. And in this dargah of Bodlo Baha, there is a Sufi who is waiting for the kishti to come. And then when the kishti arrived, is allowed by the Sayyid to touch the kishti, and also different followers are allowed to touch it. And it is also when the kishti and in his darbar that this Sufi from Lobaha can make new initiations and so new followers of Lal Shabazz calendar. So it is another example to show how important is the ethnographic data, because that kind of event, which are so important when you want to study the local society, as I say, the different component of the local society, issues related to authority, to hierarchy, etc., you cannot find any historical data, because even if I spoke about the British, about people like Richard Burton, they never give details regarding all these ceremonies, and especially all this procession. Yes. So I said before that, yes, I wanted also to give some insight about another research project. But so now I think that the time is short. So only because I have to face a similar issue, especially because when you are trained historian, as I think as Chaya said, I was first trained as historian, and then later on I shifted to ethnology, and finally what I'm doing is what we call in France anthropological history. Okay. But yes, so I have to face also the same issue. As a historian, the first thing you do is to look for historical sources. And so it was also the case when I started a new project on a sacred figure named Julelal. Similarly, there are very few mention of Julelal, but he was not named Julelal. It is a very recent expression to designate him. In all the sources, it's called Amarlal or Oderolal. And similarly, you can find very brief mention is Persian written sources on the history of Sindh, for example, in 18th century source, but after only the British sources can provide some information. And once again, Richard Burton mentioned some knowledge about Julelal, and even he translates from Sindhi some devotional poetry devoted to this sacred figure. But if you look at the vernacular production in Sindhi, it is not before the late 19th century that the first sources in Sindhi appear about Julelal. The first publication is dated 1890. Then, of course, in the early 20th century, different booklets are published in Sindhi on Julelal. But so it was also a real issue to deal with this, because in my study I wanted to see how Julelal appear in history. When are the first mention? When did Julelal as a sacred figure enter the scene, the historical scene? And in this respect, also I turn to, once again, material culture. But when I'm talking about material culture, I include not only, I would say, objects, but I include both iconography and also building, architectural building. Of course, Julelal is a sacred figure attached to the Indus River. He's said to be sometimes the god of the Indus, the river. And so I started to investigate in Sindh where could be find the oldest temples devoted to Julelal. And I was able, but once again, with the help of some archaeologists, I was able to find out some temple maybe built in the 17th century. So it was just to say that historical approach need to be also fed with other field, other disciplines when you are to to face the lack of sources, because as I started, the lack of sources is the main issue. And of course, the historian is totally depending on the sources is able to locate and to find out. So maybe now it's time for me to conclude. Um, and so I just want to summarize, so to say, two main points which are to be keep in mind. And first, it is a general comment, if I can say. Yeah, we have to remember that nothing should be taken as granted, of course, because we are working as historian, as ethnologist or anthropologist. We are working on a very specific material, the human material. It means that in the humanity, in the human people, all is interwoven, all is multi-layered, all is polysemous. And the second point I want to highlight is also the importance of circulating the historical knowledge, especially through sharing data. Because, for example, in my case, in my study of Sind and the Sindhi, there is all the data is very scattered. If you talk about the archives only, you can, some part are in Karachi, Islamabad, Delhi, Bombay, London. So it's so important to share the data. Sometimes it took years or even decades to collect all this data. And more than ever, we need to exchange, discuss, and of course, criticize our respective works. And consequently, I wish to thank one more time the institutions and the colleagues who are organizers this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. We are really happy to have you here, and then wonderful indeed. What a marvelous journey we covered through the lens of historian, a well regarded, and I must add, renowned historian and ethnographer who has authored and edited 15 books and scores of research papers. His current one, which is coming out from the press, if I'm not wrong, is the Sufi paradigm and the making of vernacular knowledge in colonial India, Sindh as a case study. So stay tuned for this one coming from Professor. Okay, so Siona, please take it over.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for this marvelous topics that you have covered. It's indeed a great learning and informative thing that we have learned today. So, so all my viewers, this was Dr. Michel Bovin. His topic was covered with, his topic was on South Asia case study. Sir, is it okay if I ask you some viewers' question? Will that be
Please,
fine with you?
please.
Yeah. So the first question coming up is, a viewer is asking that, can you please throw light of different categories of primary sources, conventional and unconventional sources for ethnographical study? I hope you got my question, sir.
Yeah. Because I'm using this expression in a paper, I think. Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Did you hear me?
Yes, we can hear.
Yes.
Uh, uh, yeah, so I thank you very much. And no, I was telling that this expression primary, conventional, and unconventional sources. I use these categories in a paper, I think. um, yeah, it's related to how the sources we use are built. Because as I said during this talk, uh, sources, if, for example, it can be a text or it can be even iconography, these sources was made by someone and nothing is free. I mean, when somebody, but it can be a group, it can be an individual, but when a group or an individual produces an item, what we will call a source, he was he wanted to reach a goal. He wanted to say something to somebody. So it is through the goal he wants to reach that he has produced this source. And when I make this difference between what I call conventional and unconventional, it was related when a source is produced. Okay, let's call it an archive in a general meaning. It can be iconographical archive. When it is produced, after some years, a given archive can be accepted as a pattern, as the main discourse on the subject. So why it become accepted as the main discourse, as the official discourse? It results from very complex processes, of course, and it depends of the place, of the time, of the community, etc. But at some point, one given representation of something is accepted by the majority of the community. Okay, let me refer to Julelal. Of course, everybody knows now the representation, the iconography of Julelal. You know that Julelal is represented, he sat on the fish. It is the main representation of Julelal. So I would call it conventional representation because it is accepted by the majority of the followers as being the best representation of Julelal. But this representation is not the only one. And if you look at the history of Julelal's iconography, you can see that, for example, in the first publication from the early 19th century, there was a great variety of Julelal's representation. Especially sometimes it was represented on a horse, sometimes it was represented going out of the Indus River, facing different Hindu character, including Shiva, Brahma, etc. Sometimes he was represented in the river, in the middle of the river. Sometimes he was talking was another character, etc. So this, I call them unconventional because they became forgotten or whatever, they are not accepted by the community of followers are being the most meaningful representation of Julelal. I don't know if I answer your question.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So can you check your audio? I guess you have muted your audio, not listened to you properly.
Hello?
Yes, sir. You're audible now.
Yeah. But you didn't hear me when I answer your question?
hear you. We were listening to you, sir. Just the last sentence was inaudible to us. Can you repeat to us?
No. I said that. So what I call conventional, it is the source, the archive, the representation, which is accepted by the majority as the official archive or representation. And so, for example, I took the example of Julelal. It is the Julelal representation when he sat on the fish. Okay, but there are other representation, what I call unconventional, because they don't follow the conventions of the official representation. And for example, in the case of Julelal, if you look at the first publication devoted to him in the early 20th century, sorry. Yeah, you can find a great variety of representation. And I would say that the present dominant representation where Julelal sat on the fish is not important in that stage. And mostly you can see Julelal on a horse or with other characters, or is standing on the fish. So he didn't sit on the fish, he's standing on the fish in the river, supposedly the Indus River, or sometimes he's also not alone, he's with character, etc. So it is a difference I make between conventional, that is official and accepted by the community, and the unconventional, it is a different representation, and sometimes it has been forgotten by the community. Hello?
Okay,
Yeah, sir.
we have questions. Siona, please take it up.
Yes.
Yes, Siona, please.
Okay.
Siona, are you
Yeah.
there? Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I'm there. Am I audible?
Okay. So take up the next
Hello.
question. Take up the next question.
Yes. Yes. Sir, the next question coming to you is. Hello, sir. Can you? Am I
Yeah,
audible to
yeah,
you?
yeah, please.
Yeah. So the next question is.
Okay, I can take
What?
it up.
Okay. Fine.
Asmita Saju is saying, Sir, can you please point out at important points to prove authenticity of sources? Just a simple
Yeah.
question. How do you? That's the puzzling question, also, not that simple.
Yeah. It's a main issue, you know. But I'm just thinking about the word authenticity, because I maybe that I would use other word such as legitimate or relevance, because authenticity, what does it mean? You see, let me turn back to when I was talking about the kishti of Lal Shabazz calendar in Sewan, because you know this object, I said, according to the people, to the tradition, it was Lal Shabazz object, Lal Shabazz kashkol with which he was begging food, etc. But so it is for the followers, it is the authentic object of Lal Shabazz. But if you look as an art historian at this object, you can see there is a given style, and it is a typical object of the 18th century. Because we have many of course, I cannot enter in the details, but it is really sure. So, if you want to speak about the historical authenticity, it is not an object which could have been Lal Shabazz one, because Lal Shabazz was living in the 13th century. So I would say that there is a kind of conflict of authenticity, because for the follower it is authentic, but for the scholar he cannot say it is authentic. So maybe that we can speak instead of authenticity about the relevance of the object, about the legitimacy, because even in the case of the Kishti, even if it is not authentic historically, it is not a 13th century object, but it is a legitimate object, because for the follower it is used as such, it is used as being the Kishti of Lal Shabazz calendar. So it is my answer.
I think the similar question was raised by Bairag Ganjan Dash. So I think you have answered the question of two of the participants.
Okay, great.
Do we have many? I mean, some more. I cannot see. Siona, if you have located.
Last one, I guess, because of questions. That's it. Like these were the questions.
Okay, so I would like to add, Professor, that what Voltaire rightly said, that appreciation is a wonderful thing. It makes us, it makes what is excellent in others belong to us as well. So you can understand what is our feeling. And
Yeah.
indeed, you have received appreciative messages also from the participants and the viewers. So thank you so much, Siona. Over to you.
Yes, rightly said, ma'am. Sir, you have really, really covered up so many topics. Like so many pointers have come up. Like we really appreciate for that. For this amazing session with us, sir. For all the
Thank you.
viewers who have joined in late, let me introduce you again. The session was conducted by Dr. Michelle Bowen. His paper was on a case study of South Asia. This program has been organized by Kaash Foundation, Center of Academic and Professional Development, in collaboration with the Directorate, Archaeology and Museum Government of Maharashtra. Thank you, sir, for being with us on board.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir, stay tuned with us. Martin Luther King Jr. very well said that we are not makers of history, we are made by history. So, by
Mhm.
this quote, we have reached the end of today's session, which was indeed an inciting one. I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Vrinda Patare and Dr. Michelle Bowen for their presence with us. Thank you so much, both of you, for being with us, for sharing your time, for sharing your knowledge with us. Imparting of knowledge is what it was today. We have learned a lot today from both of you. So, yes, viewers, tomorrow we come back with another two prominent personalities. Before that, I would love our scholars today, our panelists today, to give a review on today's session. Vrinda Pachari, ma'am, over to you. Can you give us the review for this? Okay, so I would love
Vrunda is over there. We would like to hear
yes,
from you, Vrunda. I think
I guess some
some
technical
technical.
glitches.
Yeah.
I would love Dr. Michelle Bowen to please give your remarks on this session today. We would love to listen from you again. Dr. Michelle Bowen, over to you, sir.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, it was very interesting, and really, I am very grateful to you and to the institution to have organized this session and also for the coming day. Because, as I said, for me, it's so important to circulate knowledge, historical knowledge, and to share knowledge. So it's great to have organized this, and thank you so much.
Siona, Mike.
I'm sorry, I repeat again. Thank you, sir, for this remarkable review that you have shared with us. We are honored to have you on board. I would love my viewers who are viewing right now. Thank you for sharing your precious time with us. I would request you all to stay tuned. This was the first day of 6 days web series that has come to an end today. So, Kaash Foundation Center of Academic and Professional Development, in collaboration with the Directorate Archaeology and Museum Government of Maharashtra, would request you to stay tuned for tomorrow's
Sure.
exciting and more knowledgeable sessions. Note that your attendance will be more important. So, see you soon tomorrow.
See you
Bye.
tomorrow. Okay, bye. Thank you. Bye
Hi,
bye.
Yeah.
good day, everyone.
Good
Okay,
day,
everyone.
Chaya. Thank you.
Stay home,
Yes.
stay safe.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Siona.